All right, so this morning we're going to talk about the brain's role in self-regulation. So, my name is Anna Psaute, and I am an LPC, and I'm in private practice, and I'm author certified in neurofeedback, and I specialize in working with neurofeedback and biofeedback with several different populations. I mostly work with adolescents, kids with anxiety, but I also work with athletes and helping them perform more towards their peak. And with the neurofeedback, we're looking to improve self-regulation. And my goal with presenting today is to help you guys understand, define what self-regulation is, look at the brain as an overview of the brain as a regulatory system, and then explain kind of how neurofeedback is used to promote self-regulation. And then I'll talk a little bit about other biofeedback tools that I use to promote self-regulation. So I'm really new to the Zoom platform. I do mostly in person with the neurofeedback. And so if you guys have any questions, or I'm not even sure how this would work, but if something is not working, please let me know. So what is self-regulation? Self-regulation is an automatic, unconscious regulation of our physiological states. So another way of saying this is it's the ability to monitor and manage your energy states, your emotions, your thoughts, and behaviors in ways that are acceptable and produce positive results, such as well-being, loving relationships, and learning. So this is something we often do with substances. So people drink caffeine or coffee to help them wake up, or they might drink alcohol to help them calm down, or they might use other substances, whether it's nicotine, marijuana, to help calm their system. And so that's a way of regulating themselves. But it's actually the brain's job to help us regulate our different states. So I want to talk about how the brain is wired, and then we're going to move into a little bit of a brain anatomy, and then we'll get into how neurofeedback does that. So the brain is made up of more than 100 billion neurons, and these neurons create neural networks that are interconnected, and they work through chemical transmissions and electrical impulses to communicate between itself. What is really cool about the brain, the more that technology has advanced in the last probably 30 years, the more we understand about the brain. The brain has the ability to create new neurons called neurogenesis, and it also has the ability to change and rewire, we call it neuroplasticity. And that's a lot of basis of what we do in therapy, right? Is we help people rewire their brains. Maybe you don't necessarily think of it in those terms, but we help people connect their emotions and their thoughts and create different patterns, different ways of behaving. So there's two paradigms that we can look at for understanding the brain. And the one that's really dominated our thinking probably for the last 40, 50, 60 years, and what insurance companies and major medical organizations get behind, is the neurochemical paradigm. And this paradigm, it takes a really micro view of understanding the brain, and it looks to correct these imbalances in chemicals in the brain. And the drug companies had a lot of success initially with finding pharmaceuticals that would work to help the brain. But what happened with some of that is, excuse me, the psychoactive drugs lacked specificity in targeting the systems that they wanted to. And so there was these effects that happened that were either unneeded or produced negative effects. And so I want to shift our thought a little bit more to the paradigm, the neuroelectrical paradigm. And that's how I think is a more inclusive view of the brain. And this is a macro view of the brain, and it understands the brain as a whole, and it's a self-organizing system. So neurons organize into functional assemblies and execute their functions through collective action, all while also retaining their individuality of expression. So this is a complementary perspective that is necessary to understand brain function. So I wanted to give you kind of that overview. And then how is the brain organized? So we start top down, top being the cortex, is the outer layer there. And that is something that's the highest level of our central nervous system. And that's something that continues to form all the way into our 30s and really matures all throughout life. The next layer underneath this, the cortex is the subcortical nuclei. You can see in my little picture there, there's a lot of things that go into the subcortical nuclei, but it's the deeper part of our central nervous system, and it drives much of our behavior, even though it's below the conscious awareness of our mind. So things like this limbic system is in that subcortical nuclei, the basal ganglia, the amygdala, hippocampus, hippocampus. The next piece is the brainstem as we go down a little bit further, and the brainstem is involved in our core physiological function that are vital to life. So this relays information from the spinal cord and controls our basic arousal and sleep-wake cycle. And then finally, the last part of the central nervous system is the spinal cord, and the spinal cord extends down the length of the spine, and it provides input and output to the body. And then if we talk a little bit about lobes here, I'm not sure how much you can see of the PowerPoint here, but starting in the back of the brain, we have the occipital lobe, and that is our visual cortex. And then we move up to the parietal lobe. And so we get input from the back of the brain moving towards the front of the brain. So we have input from the eyes, and then we have the parietal lobe, which is responsible for our body awareness. So where we are in space and time, also our attention to detail. And this sends information to the front of the brain. So we're talking about the prefrontal cortex, and that prefrontal cortex is mostly inhibitory. So it's stopping our impulses. It's keeping us from doing like immature behaviors. The brain is also organized into right and left hemispheres. The right hemisphere is this intuitive, emotional, kind of visual place. It stores our memories, our sounds, our touch, smell, and emotions they evoke. And it reacts automatically to voices, facial features, and gestures and places experienced in the past. And really what's kind of interesting is what it recalls feels like intuitive truth. It's just the way things are. So it's this intuition is the right hemisphere. So when something reminds a traumatized person of the past, the right brain reacts as if the traumatic event were happening in the present. So the right hemisphere is the side of the brain that really houses our trauma. The left hemisphere is linguistic and sequential. It's analytical. It remembers facts and statistics. It gives us the vocabulary of our offense. So for those who work with trauma or have heard stories from maybe whether it's rape victims or individuals who've been in a car accident and just severely traumatized, and they're asked to give a report of what happened, oftentimes they're not able to communicate because the right hemisphere is on fire. It's just so active, and it's been cut off from the left hemisphere, from the ability to speak and give language to what happened. And often, again, this is what we do in therapy, is we help calm that right hemisphere down so that we can give language to maybe early childhood experiences or other trauma that has happened in the past that we're not able to process, but we hold on to and we live out of. So the right hemisphere houses the trauma. So integration between the right and left hemisphere is actually really important. It's one element of optimal brain functioning. So proper balance of right and left activation allows us to experience a healthy mix of positive and negative emotional experiences, as well as it helps us regulate and manage our anxiety. Because the right hemisphere alone is biased towards suspicion and negativity. Right side, we're thinking, again, it houses trauma. It's, if you think right side limbic system, amygdala, that's the part where our brain is trying to keep us alive and safe. And so when that is activated, it's biased towards suspiciousness, negativity, hypervigilance. Whereas the left hemisphere is biased towards that positive affect, pro-social behavior, and assertiveness. So it brings us towards connection and wanting to connect with other people. Everybody doing good so far? I can't see anybody really. So if anybody has anything to say or they're not tracking, unmute yourself and yell at me, okay? So then how is the brain, so we just went over how the brain is organized. How is the brain developed? So when we come out of the womb, our brain is partially formed. So the brainstem is active, it's regulating our sleep-wake cycles, but the subcortical nuclei, which again houses the limbic system, is still forming. And this is a really important thing to understand, especially when it comes to attachment, that we're still well, let's say it this way: the brain is a social organ, and so it's stimulated to grow through its positive and negative interactions with others, and this starts right out of the womb as an infant. So infants go from dysregulation, right? They're crying, maybe they're hungry, wet, tired, so they cry. The caregiver responds, which provides regulation, and then they move again back into dysregulation when they get tired or hungry again. And so we have this pattern of dysregulation, regulation, dysregulation, regulation. And so as the caregiver responds in appropriate time to the infant or the child, they learn to regulate themselves, right? So this is kind of the basis of where self-regulation comes from. When we have inattentive caregivers, neglectful caregivers, abusive caregivers, we don't go from dysregulation to regulation to dysregulation. We go from dysregulation, 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 maybe regulation, dysregulation. And so there's this uncertainty. And this gets imprinted in the brain and in the neural networks at a very young age. So again, we see this coming. Oftentimes we just want to tell people to stop it, but there's more to it than just stop it. There's this unconscious right side limbic system that is controlling a lot of our behaviors. And so there's so much more to understanding how do we regulate ourselves by looking at the brain here. So in the absence of adequate assistance in regulating affect or making sense of emotion, the brain organizes a variety of defensive coping strategies. And these defenses vary in the degree to which they distort reality in order to achieve their goal of reducing anxiety. So this distortion is accomplished in circuits of unconscious memory and control anxiety and fear. And the neural connections that result in defenses shape our lives by selecting what we approach and what we avoid, what our attention is drawn to, and the assumptions we use to organize our experiences. So the brain is then sculpted in ways that assist children in surviving childhood, but can be maladaptive later in life. And this is what oftentimes we're working with as therapists, is to restructure the neural architecture to bring about more adaptive behavior. You guys probably haven't thought of yourself as restructuring neural architecture before. We also understand that the prefrontal cortex, which again is the inhibitory cortex, is stopping us. It controls our impulse control. This is also shaped by our early experiences, and this is the place where we learn to regulate our emotions. So psychopathology can be caused by difficulties in specific regions of the brain, but it can also be in the whole neural connective system. So when one or more of our neural networks necessary for optimal functioning remains either underdeveloped, underregulated, or integrated with others, we experience the complaints that often bring people into therapy. So I want to talk a little bit about what the brain is responsible for regulating. And we'll talk about then what dysregulation looks like, and then we'll get into more of the neurofeedback. So the brain is a regulatory system, and the brain needs to be stable and capable of maintaining itself in all functional states at all times. So when we are unstable, or when the brain is unstable, we can quickly move into either hyperarousal or underarousal. We have instabilities that can happen. So the brain is responsible for regulating our arousal and our affect. So how alert, how awake, how active we are. You can see on this grid down here, when we are over-aroused or over-activated, we can be in this emergency mode. It looks like hyperarousal, hypervigilance, agitation. If we're too low, we can see things like low motivation, low energy, just kind of blah feelings. So our brain is responsible for regulating what state we are in. And again, that's where I come back to, this is where we use substances to try to do that. We use caffeine to try to bring about more alertness or more awakeness when this is the brain's responsibility to do that. Or we use substances to kind of calm us down. The brain is also responsible for our autonomic balance. So the autonomic nervous system has two branches: the sympathetic nervous system, which we know as the fight or flight system, and then the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest system. So when we get stuck in hyperarousal or hyperactivation, this looks like things like PTSD, Anxiety, oftentimes addiction is coming from this place because we're not able to calm ourselves down. We rely on a substance to do so. Uh, when we are stuck maybe in the parasympathetic system, we can see things like depression, low motivation, low energy, low mood. It can also be some reasons for ADHD. The brain's not moving fast enough to keep up with what's going on. So the brain is responsible to be able to help us shift gears, right? When you're in an important meeting and you're trying to listen, you want your brain to be moving at the same pace that the speaker is talking, so that you can bring in the information. If you're ready to go to bed and mind is still like going crazy and ruminating about a thought, you're not able to then descend into sleep. So it's the brain's job to be able to shift you into the different gears for the task at hand. And when we get stuck in a gear, whether it's hyper arousal, I just can't stop thinking, my body is so tense, I'm so anxious, or I just can't get out of bed, I'm so depressed, the brain is not doing a good job of regulating its different states. So it's actually dysregulation that brings people into therapy. Dysregulation can look like trouble sleeping. So it's hard to fall asleep. It's hard to stay asleep. Dysregulation looks like mood disorders. So panic attacks, depression, anxiety, dysregulation in PTSD, right? We're unable to shift gears to move towards being stable, continuity of state. Dysregulation also looks like attention. So when people with ADHD or the inability to stay focused, that's a dysregulation. The brain's not regulating itself well. And then we also have dysregulation in behavior. So that can be things like tantrums, just untrustworthy, just not vulnerable, defensive behavior. Again, trying to keep ourselves safe. We can often look back to the right hemisphere and see that that's what's happening. Not always, but so I wanted to share, let me actually make sure that you guys are all tracking with me. Does anybody have any questions thus far? Not quite sure how to see if anybody's going to raise their hand. Everybody's doing okay? All right.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Somebody is out there. I feel like I'm talking to myself. Okay. So let's talk about what neurofeedback is. I have this video that I want to show you guys, but before we get into that, I'll explain it and then I'll give you a video. It's about an 8-minute video and it kind of summarizes a little bit of what I just said, but then also explains a little bit more of the neurofeedback. So neurofeedback, here we have 2 pictures. It's like your brain is looking in a mirror and seeing its own activity and then using it to regulate itself. So I often give an analogy when I tell people what neurofeedback is. It's like you walk by a mirror and you see that your hair is out of place. Right now, it'd probably be a Zoom call. You're watching yourself in the mirror. You can see that your hair's out of place and you just automatically fix that. You don't tell your hand to move and fix this piece of hair. It just happens. And the same thing, we show the brain its own activity and the brain that takes that information and it regulates itself with that. The other picture up here is the picture of a ballerina. And ballerinas, they practice dancing in front of the mirror so that they can watch their actions and their movements. And so then eventually they move from in front of the mirror to on stage where they don't have that feedback and they're just able to do that. So the same idea is what we use with neurofeedback is we show the brain its own activity. And we do this through placing sensors on the scalp in specific locations. And then we give that auditory, visual, and tactile feedback. And the brain uses that to move itself towards better regulation. So let's see if I'm able to actually get the video up here real quick.
Any conversation about
All right, are we seeing this video or are we having problems with it?
We are not able to see it. It looks like it's still like your computer screen, like from the PowerPoint, but it's kind of frozen in like a weird warped.
Okay. How about now? Can you see
There
this?
it is. There, you got it.
All right, thanks for the feedback. Appreciate it. All right, here we go.
Feedback has to begin with a look at the brain. The brain is really an information engine. It's really oriented toward processing lots and lots of information at the same time. And in fact, the brain is rather self-absorbed. Most of what goes on in the brain is the brain talking to itself about itself. One key aspect of brain function is that neurons don't act alone. We've got 10 billion neurons up there in our glorious cortex. And if one of them does or doesn't do its thing, that can't really matter. If it can't matter, we can't suddenly have an automobile accident because some single neuron is acting up. And so when we're looking at the EEG, for example, we're looking at those bunches of neurons performing in groups. The EEG is composed of a range of frequencies, all the way from 0 to more than 100 hertz, and the brain cares about each one. Without specially designed tools, we can now teach people how to generate more or less of these specific frequencies, and that has implications for brain function.
We like to think of neurofeedback really as a brain exercise, and specifically we're exercising the brain's ability to self-regulate.
The headroom that we have available for better function through brain training is much larger than the headroom we have available through physical exercise.
This allows you to wake up better, fall asleep better, pay attention better, calm down better, all of those state management issues that underlie good function. There's certain basic ways that the brain can fail to self-regulate appropriately. A person could be stuck in high arousal, have difficulty calming down, falling asleep. We can be stuck in low arousal, have difficulty waking up and being motivated. Also, the brain could just spiral out of its own control into a symptom like a migraine or a panic attack or a seizure.
At my worst, I was having a pretty major migraine several times a month that would last generally 3 days and sometimes would last longer, like 5 days. But I had headaches really every day, and I was taking medication throughout the day to try to control the headaches so they wouldn't become worse. And I was really at the point where they said the next step for me would be a preventative one. And then I would probably have to take this medication that causes you to drop words in the middle of your sentences, and it really affects your speech patterns, and it was scary.
Neurofeedback can be helpful with a wide variety of people, different ages, from very young children through adults, through old age, through people with very severe conditions, to people who want to improve their performance who are already functioning quite well.
Recently, my mother suggested that I talk to a friend of hers who had done neurofeedback and had had great success. You know, I definitely feel that my stress level is so much lower now than it was.
So the variables for us are where do we put the electrodes and what frequencies do we reward, which turns out to be enormously specific from individual to individual.
I basically go in and I watch a monitor, and they teach my brain to stay in this certain range of levels.
Within the first session and from session to session, we need to dial in what is the most comfortable and effective reward frequency. How much do we need to get a person more calm or more activated? Once we have that worked out, then we can think in terms of placement. And we can get quite specific in terms of which brain functions we want to target by where we put the electrodes on the head. Neurofeedback session starts with putting electrodes on the head to measure the brain waves. Nothing goes into the brain, but we're measuring what the brain is already doing. And then we use those brain waves to drive the video game, which is the feedback to the client. For example, with inner tube, when the brain is achieving the goals that we set, then the rocket ship accelerates, makes more exhaust, which is a reward. If your brain goes off in the wrong direction, then a black fog comes in and obscures the tunnel.
So we're finding these ways of twisting the arm of the brain, if you will, to get it to react and do our bidding. And it's that, the push on our part and the push back on the part of the brain that affects then the gradual learning process by which the brain learns to behave better.
From day one of my sessions in neurofeedback, my headaches have started to decrease. I mean, it started to happen right away.
So this is a skill that the brain learns, and of course once it's learned it, it's going to hold on to that and use it every day so it won't forget. We start to see change rather immediately with neurofeedback. It has some impact within the first session or the first few sessions. Then we like to think in terms of 20-session blocks, because 20 sessions is enough to get a significant measurable change, and at that point there's a decision to be made of whether to go forward or whether we're done.
So how's your head right now?
It's pretty good.
But over a number of sessions, we can get the brain to adopt a different style of functioning, which it then owns. And the person can then have a choice and say, hey, I don't need to live in anxiety anymore. I can choose to live in a calmer state.
I can really tell that my brain works differently. It almost feels like there's a lid on that's stopping my brain from going to the place that it goes to start the migraines. And I do feel a lot more peace in the way I look at my life. It's really been an overall sense of calm that I've gotten out of the process, in addition to the specific benefits of not having the headaches.
Neurofeedback is such engaging work because the more we do it, the more we learn, the more people we can help. And recently we've learned to do this training in a way that is more calming, which has extended our range to people with very high arousal, such as the autistic spectrum, severe chronic pain, agitation, anxiety.
And then there are the surprises that we can be helpful even with the degenerative conditions of the elderly, Parkinson's, the dementias, and so forth.
This is the frontier of neuroscience, and literally everything that the brain manages is coming within our reach. This has relevance to the children who are failing in our schools, to the homeless who are mentally ill, to the criminal population, to the addict in our society, to the elderly who are failing in their memory and their other capacities. And at the other end, it's useful to the sports performer who is at the top of his game, to the corporate executive, and to the stressed out housewife. Across the board, name it, it is useful and worthwhile to train the brain to better function.
The potential is huge.
All right, let me just move back to the PowerPoint.
Back to the PowerPoint, Anna, you're all good.
Okay, thanks. I don't know how you guys feel about that video, but that gets me so excited. I first learned about neurofeedback about 6 years ago, kind of in a presentation similar to this. And I was fascinated. Man, we can have such an effect on people that have been abused, that have been traumatized, people that struggle with addiction, people that are in, veterans who have experienced war, people that are incarcerated, and the chances that they didn't have. I mean, how many people incarcerated have would score so highly on the ACE scale that they just have so much trauma. And so, like, man, I love the video because it gets me super riled up and passionate about what I do. So I'm excited to tell you guys more about neurofeedback. Now, I also wanted to say that neurofeedback is not this magical tool that fixes and cures all things, right? So you're still going to feel anxious. You're still going to feel sad. You're still going to feel angry. You're still going to have emotions. We're not eradicating life. What we're doing is helping people that come in and train their brain to regulate themselves better. And so I don't have to be stuck in a place of high arousal or anger or or stuck in a place of low mood, low motivation, low energy kind of thing. So they kind of explained it a little bit, what it is. So we place sensors on the scalp based on the symptoms. It's really a learning process for the brain. And there's 3 ways in which I kind of keep track of progress for people. So I start everybody with a quick test, which is a continuous performance test used to get a baseline before neurofeedback of where a person is with their sustained attention, their impulse control, their reaction time, and their consistency. So this is something they take in the beginning, and then we take it after 20 sessions, and then again after another 20 sessions. So we keep taking it after 20 sessions. But this is an objective data point that we have to measure where a person is pre-neurofeedback and where they are after each block of 20. The next thing I do is I have an online symptom tracker that they have access to, and there's 150 different symptoms that they're able to look at and rank. And then I have them go through weekly and rank the ones, maybe 5 to 7, that they want to keep track of. And this is a really cool thing that I've really appreciated in adding to my practice, because sometimes therapy just feels so like subjective and we're not really tracking progress. And this is an objective way to track progress. I know it's based on their self-report, but they're having to reflect every time they fill out the symptom tracker on what their symptoms are. So this also increases self-awareness, right? A lot of times people have no idea what's happening in their body, or they're just, I think it happens once or twice, and they realize, this is happening every day. And so then the other form of tracking progress is just their self-report. Every time they come in, I usually ask them a series of questions to kind of see how they're sleeping, how their mood is, what their behavior's been like, if they're having headaches or panic attacks. And so then we're able to track progress over time from where they started to where they're at. Again, in this process like I mentioned, this is not something that eradicates, all of our struggles, but what we're looking for, the 3 main things that we're looking for when I start an intake is, are we seeing a decrease in frequency? So how often a symptom is happening? Yeah, my son, he freaks out all the time. He throws temper tantrums 5 times a day. We're looking at then duration, and it lasts for 45 minutes. And then how intense is this? Well, yeah, he's throwing things, that kind of thing. And so we're tracking intensity, frequency, and duration. And then over time, the hope is the neurofeedback will help the brain regulate itself better, so that it's happening less often, it's happening less intensely, and you're able to recover quicker. So as the lady mentioned in the video, and the video is very old, as you could tell by a couple of different things, the core effects of neurofeedback are calming. So we are calming the body down physically, so able to kind of descend into sleep, the physical anxiety that we feel, whether it's heart palpitations or sometimes even headaches, the tension that we hold in our body. So we're able to calm the body down physically, which impacts sleep. We're able to calm the body down, or the mind, the emotions down. So we've moved to the right prefrontal cortex to help calm emotional unrest. So whether this is feeling more like yourself, more confidence, just less emotional reactivity, ability to just feel like you're in your body. And then we can have a mental calming effect as well. So we calm down those like racing thoughts, maybe more clear thought. And then the other effect of neurofeedback is stability. So instabilities are things, it's either a genetic vulnerability, or it can be a result of a traumatic brain injury, like concussion or something. So instabilities are things like headaches, migraines, seizures, panic attacks, mood swings, even things like allergies and asthma. And the brain is, the right and left hemisphere not communicating well together, so between each other. So we can find that placing sensors in specific areas actually provides and brings stability. One of the really cool things, people don't often come to me specifically for headaches, just because insurance doesn't really cover that per se. But that is one of the biggest things that people usually report is, I have less headaches, or they're gone altogether. So I think that's pretty cool. So here's a kind of a short list of what neurofeedback is helpful for. I would say anybody with a brain, it would be great for. I'm kidding, but seriously. So neurofeedback is helpful for anxiety, depression, ADHD, headaches, migraines, chronic pain, emotional regulation, whether that's emotional reactivity or emotional sensitivity. So people that just are unable, they find that they're really emotionally sensitive. So they cry really easily. They can't control their emotions. Peak performers, sleep problems, stress, PTSD, addiction, and chronic fatigue are just some of the things that neurofeedback can be helpful for. So I wanted to share just a little bit about a couple of people that I've worked with that have found great relief. I have a PTSD client who presented with a severe childhood trauma, and then also experienced trauma in wartime experiences, and came back and just really emotionally reactive, described in the initial intake. I don't sleep was how they referred to it. And really we boiled it down to sleeping about 4 hours a night, just flying off the handle, just unsure, or didn't even know that the consequences of their actions. They would just react, and it would take days before they could even see the consequences of what had happened. And within a couple of sessions of neurofeedback, they're sleeping, they're going to bed at 11, they're waking up at 7, they're getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep, maybe 6 hours of sleep, but they're sleeping through the night. They're less emotionally reactive, they're more in control of who they are. Every time I asked them, before it was, I'm very calm, I'm very chill, just here. So I think it's really cool to see that. Another example would be anxiety. There's a lot of, so I work with a lot of kids. So kids being as young as 5 to, 18. And a lot of kids experience anxiety. It comes out physically. So it can be in the form of stomach aches, just this general nervousness, sometimes headaches, panic attacks, also like sensory processing concerns as well. And it's really cool to see how kids after, several sessions, 20 sessions, 30 sessions or so, are finding that they're more physically calm. They're no longer complaining about stomach aches. They're no longer saying, I don't want to go to school. I know this was like pre-COVID, some of these examples. There's all sorts of anxiety now with going back to school and hybrid and all of that, but kids are generally more relaxed and calm. And it's really cool to see the effects. And then depression, we're talking like lower mood, not just like severe clinical depression, more of just, in my practice, I've seen a lot of, feeling better, feeling more engaged, feeling less depressed, more motivation. So again, it's really cool. Everybody doing okay so far? No questions? I have just a little bit more to go in regards to biofeedback, and then I'll open it up to any questions or anything that anybody has to ask. So the next piece, the other piece of this is another biofeedback tool that I use is coherence or HRV, heart rate variability training. And what I do with this, you guys are probably all familiar with deep breathing and maybe walk your clients through this often, but I want to talk a little bit about the science behind deep breathing and why this is such a helpful intervention. I use technology called HeartMath, and it's really quite simple. It involves basically an ear sensor, or you could get a finger sensor, which is tracking heart rate variability and respiration rate. And what is kind of the science behind this is the heart rhythms communicate directly with the brain, and the heart rhythms are going to either improve brain function or it's going to impede brain function. So how our heart is beating is going to either make our brain function better or inhibit brain function. So we can also look at this in the terms of coherence. Let me move first to HRV, and then we'll talk about coherence. So HRV stands for heart rate variability. Heart rate variability means that if you can see on the screen here, there's peaks and valleys with our heart rate. So this is a screen showing a person's heart rate. Oftentimes we think, okay, my resting heart rate is 55, 60, something like that. And it's just beating like that all across the line, but that's not true. Our heart is beating faster as we breathe in, which is the responsibility of the sympathetic nervous system. So that's the gas, if you will. And then our heart is beating slower as we breathe out, which is the responsibility of the parasympathetic nervous system, or the brakes. And so the greater the disparity between the top peak and the bottom valley is a sign of good HRV, right? So we have good gas and good brakes. So we can be hyper focused, but then we can also be relaxed. So it's good combination. It's another way to work out that system, to exercise that system. And so HRV is actually it's an important indicator of both physiological resilience and behavioral flexibility, reflecting the individual's capacity to adapt effectively to stress and emotional demands. What's also really interesting is that abnormally low HRV, so HRV does change over time. So the older that we get, the less distance there is between peaks and valleys. It's a strong and independent predictor of future health problems, including all cases of mortality, which is just crazy that we can see a person's health based on their HRV. So the other part is coherence. So I mentioned that our heart rhythms are speaking to the brain. Our heart patterns are sending signals to the brain. And when we're in a place of incoherence, so on the left side here, HRV incoherence looks like this erratic pattern. So we would be in this place when we're feeling frustrated, we're feeling irritated, anxiety, worry, any kind of those like high emotions, but negative. And so this is sending information to the brain that impairs performance. If you've ever thought about a time when you're just pissed off and you say something that you don't want to say, well, your heart is sending these signals to the brain, and we've improved our brain performance, right? So we don't have the inhibitory control of the prefrontal cortex because it's not telling us to stop saying those things that are going to get us in trouble. But then on the other side here is the HRV coherence. This is what a coherent pattern looks like. And so this is when we're in a place where we're experiencing, positive emotion. And this is sending signals to the brain that actually improves our ability to self-regulate. It improves our reaction time, which is really cool for those people that are interested in peak performance or athletes. It improves our ability to make decisions, which is all really cool. So what I want to do, if you'll indulge me, is I want to run through a quick coherence technique, which is what I do oftentimes with my clients. And this is just a way to teach them how to self-regulate outside of the session. So I know everybody looks like nobody, I can see anybody. Okay, so if you will, I'll just have you guys all close your eyes. And as you're closing your eyes, just kind of take a scan over your body of how you feel. If there's any nervousness or any kind of tension anywhere. I'm going to have you direct your attention to the area of your heart, your chest area. I want you just to breathe just a little bit slower and a little bit deeper. Maybe breathing in on a 5 count and breathing out on a 5 count. I'll just do that for a moment here. Now, as you're breathing just a little bit slower and deeper, focused on the area of your heart, I want you to make a sincere attempt to try to re-experience a positive emotion. So that might be a feeling of gratitude or appreciation, a feeling of love for maybe someone or something. So do the best that you can to think of something or someone that brings you joy or appreciation or gratitude. And I want you to just hold on to that for a minute, just sitting there, breathing in, holding on to that emotion. All right. So hopefully I'll have you also check back in with how you're feeling. Hopefully you'll notice a difference just in how you feel. Being able to hold on to a positive, regenerative emotion brings about more calm. You're able to then make a decision or respond in a way that you want to instead of being reactive. So this is something I like to use with clients. I also have to be aware that sometimes people, when they're in a place of feeling either severely anxious or severely depressed, it's really hard for them to recall a positive emotion. And so you can help them, come up with something that they would like to feel and hold on to that. But this is something that people can use often. They can use it on their own. They don't have to be in session to do this. But it really begins to change the heart patterns, which then changes the way our brain is communicating, and improves function. So I think it's really cool. Okay, so that is all of my presentation. I would love if anybody has any questions, any thoughts, anything I didn't cover that they're curious about. I'd like to open it up. Nobody. Anybody?
Sorry about that. Crickets out there. Oh, there's a question. How often do you typically schedule your neurofeedback sessions with a client?
Yeah, good question. So because it does require regular training, and it is a learning process for the brain, it's usually at least once a week. Once a week is ideal. Well, is the bare minimum, but multiple times a week is ideal. That's not always conducive to other people's schedule or myself's schedule. But I see a lot of times in the summer, I'll have kids come in a couple times a week to train. So I also want you guys to know that I'm not just here promoting my neurofeedback, I'm promoting neurofeedback in general. And so I do a very specific kind of neurofeedback. I do infralow neurofeedback. And I think there's maybe 4 other people in the Grand Rapids area that I know of that do exactly what I do. But there are a handful of other neurofeedback clinicians in the area. So I just want to get the word out that neurofeedback is another way to help with regulation. Also, as far as how I do this with people, I like to partner with other healthcare professionals. So my specialty when it comes to incorporating neurofeedback in counseling, which is one part of what I do, is working with anxiety. And I'll counsel kids as young as 13 and adults, but I don't counsel kids younger than that, but I will provide neurofeedback training for kids as young as 5 years old. So I like to work with other practitioners in the area. Maybe their client feels stuck, they can't get them to where they want them to go, or they're just kind of spinning their wheels. It's not uncommon for then a therapist or a clinician to refer to me and say, hey, this person needs some neurofeedback. And then I just do the neurofeedbacks, and then they send them back to their counselor, and then they continue their work. Or at the same time, they're working with me and their counselor. Is anybody familiar with neurofeedback? Is this new to you guys, or is anybody interested in maybe pursuing neurofeedback or thinking about getting the training themselves? Has anybody experienced neurofeedback? Is anybody alive out there?
Yeah. So there's a couple in there that are interested, that have some students that use it. Comment that a daughter that struggles with migraines, that she'd like to look into it. Yeah, and more that have students that use it.
Awesome. Yeah. Oh, I see there's a chat. Okay, I told you I'm like totally new to this. Yeah. Yeah, so I could share my information. Do I see healing or permanent growth? Yeah, I think my favorite part is first the assessment and then the reassessment for parents or even adults to come in and say, man, I have my kid back. My kid is so much more themselves. They're so much more confident. Or adults to ask them how they're doing, and they're, I can't even remember I did that. I can't believe I used to do that. I can't believe I used to feel that way. So yes, we see that the growth, there is growth and healing. And as far as the permanent question goes, yes and no. It's a hard question to answer. I would first of all talk about how much training a person needs. It just depends on a person, how much training they actually need to get where they want to go. So 20 sessions is kind of the minimum. In my practice, I try to encourage people to do at least 35 sessions. But then as far as, so the brain is learning this new pattern of regulation, and it can get it can get off track when maybe a major stressor or something in life happens, and so they might need a tune-up. So it's not uncommon. I haven't really seen it with adults, but I have had a couple of kids come back in for some tune-ups for a couple sessions here or there where they need to get back on track of regulating themselves better. Is neurofeedback covered by insurance? Yeah, yes and no. So no, yes, very specifically. So Blue Cross Blue Shield will cover neurofeedback if you have an ADHD diagnosis, and if the ADHD diagnosis has to be within a year, and you have to be under the age of 18. Other than that, no insurance company covers neurofeedback alone. So how I typically do it is I incorporate it right into what we're doing. So they have sensors on the scalp. They're watching maybe a peaceful scene or like the inner tube that you guys saw. And I'm sitting behind them watching the computer, but we're working towards counseling goals. And it doesn't really impact or interfere with the neurofeedback they're getting. So it's basically like if we were to go to the beach and sit side by side on a bench and watch the lake or the ocean, we can still have therapeutic gains while you're also watching something else. So that's how I do it. So if they don't come in with something that I either work with, like I feel like is in my wheelhouse of counseling, then it'll be a private pay situation. Or some people come for just neurofeedback training, so they just want that because they either already have a therapist or they've tried therapy before and it just doesn't work for them, so they want to try something new. So in that case, it's then private pay. Any other questions? Thanks. I'm glad I finally saw the chat.
Hey, no worries. You didn't miss much.
Thinking I'd lost everybody. Any other questions? Yeah, I can put my information. Would it be best to put it in the chat, like how to get a hold of me? I have a website.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah, you can go ahead and put it in there. We will be sending these out to members as well. So you can also, I mean, we have your contact information, but I think it wouldn't be bad to pop it in the chat there. And then I'm just going to take a moment here while I have everybody on to just remind you following Anna's presentation here to pop back into the main session. Again, that link can be found on the conference webpage that you signed into. Same way you got to this link here. We are going to be doing 5 raffles and a few commercial breaks from our sponsors. So it is beneficial for everybody to hop back onto that main link following this presentation. And then you can feel free to wrap it up whenever you're ready.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, I don't have anything else to share. I don't.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your presentation on behalf of the WMCA board. We'll wrap up just a few short minutes early here, and thank you so much. And we look forward to working with you again in the future.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you.